Alright, let's get started. Today we are going to be making some Scrabble tiles for our wall, and what you will need is some 4x4 pieces of wood. I found these pre-cut. I ordered mine in bulk online. You can also find them at craft stores. You can even get a 4x1 board and cut it into 3¼ inch pieces, because a 4x4 isn't actually 4 inches wide, it's 3¾ inches. But mine are 4x4. I have a transfer template for my Scrabble letters so that I get the right letter and number on each one. If you want to get this one, I will have it available on my Etsy shop for the entire alphabet. I have some painter's tape, but masking tape will also work. I have some acrylic paints. I also have some gesso, but you can also just use white acrylic paint if you don't have gesso. I have some brushes, water, something to mix my paints on, some transfer paper. You can get this at a craft store, and there are several different types I will be using, and I will tell you about them as I use them. And of course, just a little bit of sandpaper to take the rough edges off of your piece of wood. And I'm using 120 grit sandpaper. You can use fine grit or rough grit, it really doesn't matter, it's a personal preference. So the first thing we're going to do is prep our wood piece. And the first way I'm going to show you how to make this is just a simple traditional Scrabble tile, and it's going to be just the plain wood. And I'm just going to smooth off the edges really quick, just by going at a slight angle, maybe like a 45-degree angle from the corner. I just don't want it to have any splinters on it. You can decide. All right. Then I'll just clear off all the dust. And I'm ready to put the letters onto my tile. So I'm going to put this to the side and get my template. So I'm going to do the letter A first. I'm just going to cut that out. I'm going to take this and make sure it lines up all right. It does. And next I'm going to get my transfer paper. Now this transfer paper is a light gray transfer paper, and it has a white backing so that if you wanted to print your tile letters onto the back, you could. This one is a printable transfer paper, but I like to reuse my transfer paper, so I don't like to print on it. And I'm just going to put the gray side of my paper down on my block, line it up along the top. And I'm going to put the letter on top, and you just want to make sure that your paper is underneath the letter and that you can feel the edges of your block of wood and that it's lining up with the edges of your paper. And then to make sure that it's not going to move, I'm going to take a piece of painter's tape, and being careful not to cover up my letter, I'm just going to fold that over the top like that. Make sure the edges still line up, and that way it won't move while I'm tracing my letter onto my block. I'll take a pencil. I'm using a drafting pencil, but you can use any pencil that you have. You can even use a pen. And I'm going to trace my letter. I'll put my pencil down, and then I'm going to lift up the paper and the transfer paper to make sure that that transferred on. Lift that up so you can see it. You'll see I have a little light gray line for the edge of my letter. And I take the tape off. Then I'm just going to start filling in my letter. So I'll get my palette. You can also use a paper plate if you don't want to worry about cleaning it later. And I'm just going to paint in my letter black. Shake that up so the paint is well mixed and it's not watery when I squirt it out of the little tube here. And then I'm just going to get a tiny little bit out, because you can always get more paint out. You can't put the paint back into the tube. I'm going to get a fairly small brush. I'm going to use a round brush for this, my number 8, but you can use any size that you feel comfortable painting inside these lines. Get a little water on my brush, dry it off just a little bit, get paint on my brush, and then I'm going to roll the tip so that I get a nice fine point. Then I'm going to start at the edges of my letter and just paint it in. And you'll see I have a little problem showing up. Since I didn't put any finishing stuff on this, it's starting to leak into the grain of my wood. That's because I had too much water on my brush and I need to have it have more paint like I did on this side. So what I'll do is I'll just get my brush really wet, clean out my brush, maybe go in a little bit with some water. Might seem a little counterintuitive because it's going to make a big splotch. And then I'm going to just dab that up a bit. Then I'll take just a little bit out. There'll still be some that shows. And then I'm just going to make my letter a little thicker there with just some pure paint. Like that. I should have let it dry a little more. It's still bleeding through a little. We'll come back to that section in a little bit. I'll show you some ways to hide that. Make sure that you have more paint than water. Alright, now let's see if we can fix that mistake down there a little bit more, at least make the edge look a little more crisp. Now I don't want to make my letters super fat here, but I still have that wood grain leak right there. So what I'm going to do is, because my wood is very close to the color white, I can actually hide that with a little bit of white paint. Here, let's give that just a little bit more time to dry, and I'm going to paint in my number in the corner first. There we go. Now let's fix where the paint bled into the wood grain there. So I'm just going to get a little bit of my white paint, shake it up, and since I don't think people are just going to be staring right at the single letter, because I'm probably going to be spelling something out, I'm not going to worry about being too detailed about everything. Like, you'll see there are little mistakes here and there along the edges, and it should be fine when it's up on the wall. It'll make it look more hand done rather than store-bought. And I'm getting more paint than water on my brush, really loading the paint on. And then I'm going to roll my brush to get it a nice fine point. And then I'm going to really carefully come in and paint over that black that leaked through. Like that. Fix a few little smudges there. Maybe a few in here too. Now if you look really close, you'll see the white line, but when it's far away you really can't tell. If you're worried about that, just dry off your brush a little bit. Maybe leave just a little bit of the paint on and don't rinse it off in the water, but just dry it off a lot. And then just pull that paint in from the edge so it blends in and it's not such a hard line. And that'll blend it into the background. And there you go. There's a traditional black on plain wood Scrabble tile. Let's do one that's on a different color background. So I'll get another board, little tiny wood piece here. I guess it really doesn't count as a board if it's just a 4x4. And you'll notice this one has a little flaw on one side. But if I flip it over, it's just plain wood. I don't want to have the flaws showing on mine, but some people like that. So if you're okay with that, just leave it on the front. I'm going to flip mine over and use the back side. This one I've already sanded, so you don't need to watch me sand it again. And I'm just going to pick a color for my background. Let's do black. Or let's see, that's not going to show up on my table real well. Let's do a gray. I'll just mix the black that I already have out with the white that I have out. It'll make it a little easier for me. I'm going to get a big brush. This one is a 3/4 inch brush, a flat brush, and I'm going to get it wet. Let's just mix that together to make the gray I want. Or you can just get a plain color out of the tube. If you are going to mix your color, mix a lot of it if you're going to be doing more than one color, because it's hard to get the same color again later. Then I'm just going to paint following the wood grain. So my wood grain is going up and down on my little wood block. So I'm going to follow the wood grain going up and down. And then don't forget to get your edges. because those are going to show up, and you even want to paint the back after you get the edges. Otherwise, what's going to happen is when this dries, it's going to make your wood block curl along the grain. And just like that would be enough for the back. Now my front is dry enough that I can let it dry for a little bit there. See, it's not coming up on the table when I lay it backwards. So I'm going to let that dry a bit. If you don't want to wait too long for it to dry, you can go ahead and get a blow dryer. Mine is dry enough that I can put it back so the front is facing up again. I'm going to clean off my brush. Now when it dries, you might have noticed some pieces of the wood started to poke through. You would go over that with a second layer if you need to. I'm just going to go over it the way it is, even though I have a few pieces of wood showing through, just so I can move on to another technique fairly soon. And let's get my next letter. I'm going to go alphabetically and do B. All right, and that fits on top really nicely. Now, because I have a slightly darker color with the gray, my light gray transfer paper is not going to show up on this. So what I'm going to do is actually use some white transfer paper, which you can also get at the craft store. And so that I know which side I need to use, I have a black scrap piece of paper here, and I'm going to put my transfer paper down. And what I'll do is I'll make a little mark on the corner over that scrap piece of paper, and it didn't come off there. So this is actually going to be my transfer side. So if I flip it over and make that mark again, you'll see I got a little white mark on my black paper. So that shows me that this is the side I want facing up, and this is the side I want facing down. I'll take my gray block, put my white transfer paper on it, put the letter on top of that, feel the edges of my block through the paper to make sure that it's lined up. I'm going to get some more of that tape, put it along the top, keeping my edges lined up before I wrap it around, and then wrapping it around there. And that should keep it in the same place. I'll take my pencil again and trace over the edges, making sure to push firmly. All right, let's check that out. I'll flip this up. And there you can see that I got some white lines marking the edge of my letter B. All right, so now I'm going to paint in my B white. So I'll get a little bit of white again, because I don't want to use the stuff that already has the gray mixed in with it. I'll get that same number 8 brush I was using before. Let's put the 3/4 inch brush back in my holder. Now this one, it doesn't matter so much if you get more water on your brush, because the paint should keep it from leaking into the wood grain and then making those lines. If you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, though, just make sure you have more paint than water. That never hurts with this kind of craft. And there you go. Now let's say I made a mistake with this kind of painting and I went out of the lines a little bit. What I'd want to do is I'd want to go in with a little bit of water, maybe kind of scrub it out a little bit. Come in with my paper towel or whatever I'm drying my brush with and just dab it up a little bit. You'll see that gets a little bit of it up, but you're still going to need to go back in with your brush and some of that background color. I'll mix up some of my gray again. And then you'll just go in and fix around the edge. I need a little darker. Just fix any mistakes you made. Mix a little more white in there. Oh, too much white, oh my goodness. And just dry off my brush. and blend that little paint spot that you put in with some water. And there you go, we fixed that mistake. And there you are. That is a Scrabble tile with a solid color background. Now my white is a little transparent. If you wanted it to be a little bit more opaque, you could go over with another layer. I'm just going to move on to my next one. I'm going to show you how to make a faux stain. Now you can do a real stain, and you can get those at the craft store or at a hardware store, but they can be a little bit of a pain to work with, and I feel like they don't smell very good, especially if you're working inside. So I'm going to show you how to make it look like you stained the wood block by just using acrylics. So I'm going to clean off my brush I was just using and put that away. I'm going to use a brown because that's a general stain color, but you can use any color you want and make a colored stain if you'd like. Get a little bit of brown on my palette. I'm going to get a thicker brush. This is my 1-inch brush. You could also use that 3/4 inch brush again. And this time I want to get a lot of water on my brush and mix it in with the paint. So I almost have more water than paint. And then I'm going to just paint that in the direction of the grain, and you'll see it's making the wood grain pop out a little bit more. And let's say I accidentally put too much paint on, I would just go back in with just some plain water and really scrub it to make it blend in. And I'll keep doing that. And then I'm going to get the sides. This is especially important to do if you have a thicker block. I decided to do mine really thin. There we go. And do the back again, because same thing that can happen with that solid background block. If you don't paint both sides, it's going to curl one way, and then your Scrabble block will be bowed. Now it's very important to make sure that this one dries before you put any paint over it. Let's see. Yeah, this is still very wet. Let me get a little more stain up there so it looks nice and even. So that'll be what it looks like once you get the faux stain on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my blow dryer to dry this real quick. Alright, so now my block is dry. I can feel it. No paint is coming up on my hands, and it doesn't feel cool. So I can go ahead, this is the side I was going to paint on. Let's do it this way. And I need to put the number on, or the letter on this side. Let's keep going in alphabetical order and do letter C. Put that right there. And this time I'm going to show you another kind of transfer paper, just in case this is the kind you could find. You can also get a carbon transfer paper that comes in a roll, and it will have a gray side and a black side. The black side is going to be the side that you want facing your wood block, and the gray side is going to be the side you want facing up. So I have a piece that I've cut off. I've used this before for several other transfers. So I'm going to put the gray side up, black side is going to be facing down. I'm going to put that on there. Put my letter C on, line up the edges, and I'm going to get a piece of tape, just like before. Fold that around the back, make sure the edges still line up. Grab my pencil and go over the edges of my letter C. There we go. I'll take the paper off. You'll see this one is much darker. So if you don't want to have really dark lines, you're going to want to go with that gray paper I showed you earlier. And let's put this one brush away, make sure it's clean. Let's just do a traditional black on this one again. Now, because I didn't completely seal my wood by having a solid color, and it still has the wood grain, you can really feel it really well, and the water will still be able to seep into the wood grain because it's not completely covered and you can still see the wood grain through it. I need to make sure that I have a drier brush rather than a wetter brush. So I want to have more paint than water on my brush. On this one, you're going to want to be very careful not to get out of the edges, because when you do a faux stain, it's really hard to cover up mistakes if you go out the edges. Honestly, I would just suggest getting a new block at that point and starting over. Because getting that transparent look that you got with the water is going to be impossible after you're painting over it with the brown or whatever color you use to try to cover up a mistake. So just be really careful on these ones. There you go, a faux stain Scrabble tile, letter C. I'm going to show you one more, which is going to be a solid color with a faux stain on top of it. And again, the edges are already done on this block, so we don't need to worry about that. Clean off my brush again and put that away. And for this one, I'm going to do a blue background with a white faux stain over the top. I'm going to get my blue, shake it up so the paint is mixed. Oh, some paint came off the top of my tube. A little bit. And since I'm not mixing the colors, I'm going to just get a little bit at a time because I can always add more color to it, but I can't put that back in the tube. I'm going to get my 3/4 inch brush and follow the grain of my wood. I'm going more paint than water because I want my bottom layer to be thicker than my top layer. Go ahead and flip it around and get the back so that it won't bow. And I want to get just about as thick on the back with my background color because I'm going to be doing 2 layers of paint on the front. So I want to go a little thicker on the back than I did with the other ones. And then I'm going to get the edges, and especially on the front part of my block, I'm going to make sure that I make the paint a little thicker along the edges because I'm going to be sanding the edges after I put my second layer color on. Wash out my brush because I'm all done with my blue now. Clean it off, and then I'm going to go ahead and blow dry this so we don't have to wait. Alright, so my background is already dry. I can touch it and no more paint is coming up. This is all paint from before. And it doesn't feel cool, it feels kind of warm. So I am ready to do my top layer, which I'm going to do with white. You can use either gesso or white acrylic. I'm going to stick with acrylic. Put that where I put the other white before. I'm going to get my big 1-inch brush, but my 3/4 inch brush will work too if I cleaned it out enough. Make sure I don't have anything in there paint-wise. Leave a bunch of water on my brush. Maybe even dip it a little bit into the water with some paint on it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the grain and paint it on really transparent. So it kind of makes it look light blue instead of pure white. If you accidentally end up with too much white, you can come in with a little bit of water and kind of thin it out. I would not come back in with your background color at all. You don't want to do that. You want these to be 2 separate layers. So it'll look like that. And clean off my brush. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my blow dryer again and go ahead and blow dry that. If you are doing more than one of these tiles, you can just go ahead and let each of them air dry in between each step. I'm going to grab my blow dryer though to save us some time. All right, so my paint is dry. I can touch it. It doesn't feel like it's sticky. It's not coming up on my hands. It feels nice and warm instead of feeling cool. So I know it's dry all the way down instead of just being dry on the top layer of paint. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rough up the edges of my tile with a little bit of that sandpaper I used at the beginning to take the edges, the sharp edges off. Just a little bit, so that my blue will kind of show through. Just like that, maybe scratch over the top a little bit to make some blue lines show through if you want. Give it a little bit more texture. It's up to you. Then you want to take some paper towel or a clean paintbrush and just wipe off all the dust so that you have a nice clean surface to transfer your letter onto. Clean off your background, working space. And then with this type of faux stain, what I like to do is I like to use the background color for the Scrabble tile letter. So let's do our last letter. Where is it hiding? There it is. I'm going to finish up with the letter D. Line that up. I'm going to use my light gray paper that I used before. You can see it still has the A on it. Turn my palette over a little. That on top with the D. Same thing as before. Get the tape, put it along the top. And then peel that off. You can see the D transferred on really nicely with the gray. Get my brush. Where's my number 8? That's the one that's been working best for me so far. Get my blue. And I shouldn't have to worry about it sort of bleeding into the wood grain as much with this one, so I can go ahead and mix more water with it if I like that look, because this is going to be more sealed. Alright, and there you are. There is a faux stain over a solid color background. Alright, so you now have your tiles and you're ready to hang them up. One of the best ways I've found to hang these tiles up, since they are so thin, you can see they're really, really thin, so you can't really put a hanger on the back very easily, is to just get these 3M stickies and put them on. And the ones that I like the best are the ones that are Velcro. So you can stick one side on the wall and stick one side on the back of one of your tiles, like that, and then it'll just stick onto the wall. You'll actually want to hide it behind, and you can just stick them onto the wall. You can probably put it long ways along the top, and then you'll be able to stick it onto the wall like that. And if it gets a little crooked, the nice thing about these is you can take them off and then just reposition it a little bit and adjust it as you need to.